Welcome to the Mission First People Always podcast. We're glad you're here. And now our host, Dr. Mike Patterson.
Welcome to another episode of the Mission First People Always podcast. This is your host, your old pal, Dr. Mike, and I'm really looking forward to exploring the topic that I never thought I'd be talking about on this podcast. In this episode, we explore how ballet and leadership have a lot in common, and perhaps more accurately, how ballet should inform our approach to leadership. Now, I'm going to be right up front with you and say, I don't know anything about ballet. I know a little bit about leadership, perhaps, but I know absolutely nothing about ballet. But fortunately, my guest on today's show knows a lot about both. My guest today is Ahli Moore. He's the founder of X Factor Solutions. He started that company in 2009 after spending over a decade with Accenture. He had a 3-year stint as the chief operating officer of another consulting firm, Giant Leap Consulting. But he has been heads down with X Factor Solutions for the last several years, where he is an active consultant. He is a road warrior. He's out there every week. I can't keep track of him. He's out there with Delta Airlines, the CDC, the National Science Foundation, the VA, the Army, you name it. And Ali has probably worked with their organization at some point. He loves to work with clients. He's great in the front of the room. He's great in the boardroom. And I'm just excited to have Ali on the show today. He's kind of an expert, or he focuses on change management, human performance. That's where he sort of developed at Accenture. He's based out of Atlanta. He's involved in his community and a lot of youth-based organizations, building future leaders. He is a major supporter of his university. He's the number one alumnus of Florida State University. He does a lot there. But Ali, thank you for being on the show. It's good to see you again, my friend.
Thank you for having me. It's great to see you as well.
Now, Ali, I just went through your bio. I sort of ad-libbed a little bit, but tried to cover the high points. Before we get started in our conversation today, tell the audience sort of a little bit about your work, what you do, how you serve clients. You're one of the busiest guys I know. So what keeps you out there so much?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. So first of all, thank you for the bio. That's my formal, official bio. But I've been doing this for almost 30 years now. And as you said, I started my career with Accenture before it was Accenture, when it was still Anderson Consulting, a division of Arthur Anderson. And then it became, later on it became Accenture. And so I spent the first third of my career there, almost 11 years, and I made it to the executive ranks, which just is a formal way of saying that I had a lot of responsibilities, a lot of engagement with clients, a lot of lessons learned on what to do and what not to do in leadership. When I transitioned away from Accenture and I became the chief operating officer for Giant Leap Consulting, it was actually a pretty soft landing, because the chief executive officer for Giant Leap was also a former Accenture executive, and he was Accenture's first internal executive coach. And so what I learned during my stint with Giant Leap was more of the day-to-day interaction with clients, not the giant strategic big picture spreadsheets, multiple people, but what makes this particular leader click, right? What makes this leader successful? What makes this leader engaged with his or her stakeholders? Those interpersonal things is what I took from Giant Leap. And so when I started my own company, it was a mix of taking that background or that pedigree that I had learned from Accenture, combining that with more of that personal touch that I learned and that I was practicing at Giant Leap, and kind of combining those into an approach where we're still with clients fixing challenges. We're still with clients teaching leadership development and organizational change management strategies and all of these things. But it's less about big models and less about giant spreadsheets and more about me connecting with the stakeholders, me connecting with the people that are making the impactful decisions or who are being impacted by those decisions, and ensuring that as we chart their path forward, as we look for whatever they need in terms of organizational success, that we're identifying those things, and we're working with them in a capacity that they can actually absorb. And so we're not talking over their heads. We're not putting things in front of them that aren't relevant, but we're saying, what's going to make you successful today, tomorrow, and throughout the next year and the next 2 years? And for many clients, it takes on a different outlook, a different capacity. And so, to your question, what makes me keep going? It's exciting for me to do that. It's
Mm.
it's engaging, and it's fulfilling when I know that I can work with someone and I can see both an immediate change, but also I can see that their future within their company and in whatever role they serve, they can find fulfillment in that, and they're happy to do what they're doing, right? They're not seeing work as this responsibility that they're struggling to get out of bed each morning and go do, but they're saying, I see where I fit in. I see the differences I can make, and I'm happy to be doing that. And so in turn, that fulfills me and it keeps me going as well.
Yeah, I can relate to that. I love that a relational approach, and I have to say it's hard to believe that you've been at this 30 years. You look great for a 30-year veteran. It's here. Let's get to our conversation. So I could ramble on about some other things, but the reason I invited you on the show today is because I saw something that you wrote and put out on LinkedIn, and I thought it was really intriguing. And I knew a little bit about your background, but the way you presented it, this particular article, and you put great content out on social. The way you presented this particular article, it just caught my attention. I thought that's a really interesting take. So the name of the article that's on LinkedIn, and I'll encourage people to connect with you on LinkedIn and some of your other social platforms. All that information's in the show notes. But the article you put out is called Ballet, Business, or Both. And I thought, my goodness, I've never thought about making that connection. That's interesting. So tell me a little bit, tell us, the audience, about you don't look like a ballet dancer. Let me just start there. You look more like a football player than a ballet dancer. What is your connection to the world of ballet, and why the heck do you know anything about it?
All right. So first of all, I am not a ballet dancer. I'm not a current ballet dancer. I'm not a former ballet dancer. I, in fact, am a former football player uh, years ago. But my connection is through my wife. She is a professional or a former professional uh, ballet dancer. She's a choreographer now, and she's a professor of ballet. She's a professor of ballet theory. All those things. That is her world. But being connected with her, it has become my world as well. Now, i- a little background about why I wrote that particular blog was, one, I think that when we talk about leadership, we overcomplicate it a lot of times. I fully support and understand the importance of academic based models of leadership and all the different styles of leadership. But I think that often those of us who are practitioners overcomplicate it. And so keep that in mind. The second thing is that when we talk about leadership, it has to be relevant. It has to be applicable. And often, when we're talking about these things, we're presenting these high conceptual theoretical models that make sense, but is it something that a leader can apply immediately and on a daily basis and consistently if they can't remember all the bits and pieces of it? And then the third thing is, so um, I'm a creative person, but not in the classic sense where I can't play an instrument, I can't dance, I can't draw, I can't paint, I can't do any of those things. But what I can do is I can make connections between concepts that may seem disjointed, like ballet and leadership, and my creativity comes in when I can combine that need to make things relevant along with the need to make things applicable and simplifying leadership concepts. And so I say all that as a background because one day I was sitting there with my wife and we were watching the Nutcracker, and a young lady on stage was making a particular movement. It's called an Italian fouette, where she was kicking her legs, pivoting in the other direction, kicking her leg, pivoting. And I turned to my wife. I was like, "That's the most amazing thing I've ever seen in my life. How can people do that?" And she said, "Well, it's practice. We practice that. There are some basic movements that we practice, and then by the time you get on stage, that movement isn't really that complicated for her because she's been practicing those things." Now, my creative brain kicked in, and I immediately thought, that's the same thing that we do every day in business, in a business leadership capacity. When people say, how is this person ascended to this level of leadership? Or how is this person so easy? It's so easy for them to lead this team. I said, well, it was practice. They didn't wake up one day and just say, I'm going to lead this organization. I'm going to lead this team and I'm going to be good at it. They practiced. They built some foundational steps and some foundational knowledge. They practiced again. They honed their skills. And so by the time you see them leading the organization, by the time we experience their leadership capabilities, this wasn't something that they just stood up one day and said, I'm the leader. They built knowledge, they honed their skills, and then they got to that point. So as I started to think about that connection between what I had just seen on stage and my understanding of leadership, I just started thinking, well, what are all of the connections between what I'm experiencing watching these people on stage and what I've experienced in a leadership capacity? And then I just started writing. And so there were multiple steps as I started thinking about, hey, this is a connection, this is a connection. And so that's how a former not so good football player who's never actually danced ballet started making the connections between how the movements, the practice, the rehearsal, the execution of ballet very closely mimics what good business leaders do on a daily basis in their own organizations.
Well, I think if you wanted to take it to the next level, Ali, you could actually try to demonstrate some of this stuff in ballet. Get out there on the floor, and that would, you mentioned you want to increase your social presence. I mean, a little bit of you doing some ballet video might go viral. I don't know. Could be.
I've been a guest and performer in the Nutcracker for one season. I was Drosselmeyer, but he does magic on stage. He doesn't actually have to dance. So that
Okay,
is
okay.
that is the extent of my on stage performance experience.
Well, I do like what you said about the need to make ideas relevant, simple, and memorable in order for them to be useful for anyone in the real world. You and I work with leaders and emerging leaders in the real world who have a long list of things they've got to do every day, and presenting them with deep theoretical ideas and inviting them to read chapters and textbooks and respond with long narrative papers just isn't going to happen. Uh, we're too busy for that. Real people are too busy to do that. And so we've got to keep it simple. We've got to keep it clean and relevant and memorable. And I appreciate your focus on doing that. So, what are some of the keys? You've identified several keys or connections between ballet and business, ballet and leadership. Let's just talk through those. And I think the audience will appreciate some of those points. So I'll let you jump in. I've got some notes over here to track with you here. Looks like the first one is passion and purpose.
Yeah, absolutely. And when we talk about passion and purpose, sometimes people separate those and they say, "You're right. What your passion is might not be your purpose," and things. For me, I've combined those. And the other thing about passion and purpose is, as I say this, I'm not. This isn't any groundbreaking. I'm not breaking any news here that you have to be passionate about what you do. When I think about the ballet world, people who are professionals started as youth, right? And they discovered that they had a passion for the art early in their lives, and that's how they became hooked on it. And so when I now, translate this into business, it's whether you had a passion for the organization that you work for, or whether you saw your purpose in life working for this type of business. When I think about good leaders and when I think about people who are highly engaged within their organizations, they often regardless of how they got there, they have to ask themselves on a constant basis, do I actually like what I'm doing? Do I still have the same passion for this now as when I started? Do I still see a purpose for myself within this organization and similar to when I interviewed to be here? Or has that changed? And not only do you like what you do you love what you do? To be a leader often means that whether whether I'm tired, whether I have no energy, because I see a purpose and I love what the results are of this work, I'm going to get up and I'm going to make the necessary adjustments. I'm going to make the necessary, meetings, whether I'm tired or not. So when those times get hard, when you're running a business and the cash flow seems low, or when your mind is numb, that love of the impacts that you're making or the passion for what you're doing is what gets you out of bed. It's what pushes you forward. It can be what inspires you to go to that additional meeting. And so for the young ballet people to go to that one more audition, for the business people, it's making that one more call, right? It's what drives you to keep going. So in the sense of getting up and getting motivated and getting engaged, I saw a lot of connections between what my understanding of how people get started in certain art forms like ballet and what people, what can get people started in their businesses as well.
So, so what do you tell people who honestly answer that question? I'm not sure if I'm still passionate about this. I'm not sure if I'm living out my purpose in this particular organization. I'm sure, you do a lot of executive coaching. I'm sure you've had people say that to you. What's your response?
Well, for the majority of the people, so one, all of this is contextual, right? And everyone enters into these conversations differently. But I ask them, what is your time worth? We have a limited amount of time. You and I were just talking. I'm 30 years into this type of work. You even longer. But at some point, our time runs out. And if you're not working, for me anyway, if I'm not working in something that brings fulfillment, joy, helps me to stay energized, makes me happy, then at some point, I am wasting my time in this organization. I'm wasting my time on this planet. But even within the organization, if I'm not showing up engaged and I'm not showing up with a purpose, then I'm not giving my all to this organization because
Mm.
I know that this isn't where I'm supposed to be. So who cares whether I give it my all or not? Because I'm not going to be here much longer anyway, or I really don't care about the results. If you're working in something that you're not passionate about, if you're working in something where you can't find your purpose, I think by default, you can't give it 100%. And it'll show in your performance. It'll show in whatever assessments you get back, feedback that you get back from your clients. And so the decision is up to you. Do I want to remain here? Maybe the need to make money outweighs your need for personal fulfillment and happiness. And if that's the case for you, then that's your answer. For me, I can't stay consistent and I can't drive myself to the best performance if I don't believe in what I'm doing and if I don't believe that I'm making a positive impact.
Do you encourage leaders to have conversations with the members of their team about this topic, passion and purpose? In other words, talking to your team members about whether this is the right fit for them. Are they looking for other opportunities? I had a guest on the show a few months ago, and he encouraged leaders to have very proactive conversations with people about whether this was the right place for them, whether it was the right fit. Did they feel like they were thriving and finding fulfillment here? And if not, let me help you find a new path forward.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I encourage people to have those conversations before they're hired, right? During the interviewing process, during onboarding, as part of their annual assessments. These are ongoing conversations. And you can approach these conversations from multiple angles. One is when you're in the initiation or initial parts of determining whether someone will be a good member of this team. And I shy away from saying a good fit because when we talk about cultural fit versus cultural additions to a team, sometimes people will conflate whether this is a good fit for them professionally versus whether this is a good fit for someone from a cultural standpoint. And I'm an advocate for adding to the culture of an organization as opposed to picking people and saying this person fits in because they're, exactly like everyone else who's already here. But that's a different point. But having those conversations around, is this something where you can be successful, and how would you define success? Basically, I'm asking them to articulate, what does it take to be successful? And is this something that you can see yourself doing here? And so that's an upfront conversation, but then it's an ongoing conversation to ask someone, are you still generally happy? But how do you define that? It's not a yes, no, right? It's not a closed-ended question. I want them to talk with me about what gives them enjoyment, what gives them fulfillment here in the workplace. And the second part that we also know is that the workplace is shifting. And there's no longer the days where someone goes somewhere and they're just happy to have a job and that's where they're going to be for the next 30 years. People look at how the impact of what they're doing fits in with their own lives and how it impacts society. And if there isn't a connection there, often people will leave. So having to your question, having those conversations up front, honest conversations, both at the beginning and throughout their tenure with an organization, I think is critically important.
Yeah, I think it's naive for managers to think that people aren't thinking these things anyway. So if I don't talk about it, then it's not going to be a thought that passes through their brain, and they're going to stay here forever and nose to the grindstone. It's just not the way things work anymore. We need to treat people as adults and recognize that there's that we all have a sense of purpose and we're driven differently. And why not take that journey with them versus trying to, isolate them. Okay, let's move on.
And I add one last point to that because I agree with you 100%. If there's ever any inconsistency or conflict between someone's personal goals, values, and purpose, and that they use on the job side, the purpose of that job, if there's ever any conflict, their personal values and their personal goals and their personal purpose is always going to win out, right? Even if they stay at the job, they're going to stay there, but using their own purpose as opposed to the organization's purpose if there's conflict. Now, when they're congruent with each other, then it's great.
Yeah, and as we both agree, the world has changed and we can't assume people are going to stay for 30 years in a job. My dad worked at his company for 34 years. I've got a buddy who has been with his company for 40 years. And occasionally we see people like that. It's just a really rare thing anymore. So why not engage with people openly and honestly and speak to reality versus these mythical people that are few and far between. So let's move on. Your next point about how dancers and leaders sort of are similar is in the sense that we need to practice and prepare on both fronts. So tell us what you mean about that.
And again, going back, I actually talked about this a little bit earlier in the introduction. That is that in business, whether I'm responsible for delivering results directly to a client or whether I'm leading a training workshop, what you see, that output, that's the result of hours, days, weeks, months, years of prep work. That's not me waking up this morning and creating a training, project or a training program and then delivering it later on that day. And so when I was thinking about the on-stage performances of the ballet performers, they didn't make it onto stage or into that performance stage until they've spent hours in the rehearsal studio. And because I'm married to a professional choreographer, a former ballerina, I've seen the hard work that people put in for weeks just to perform for 3 minutes, right? For half a year to put together an on-stage performance that's gonna be a few minutes long. And it's the same thing in business. You have to be realistic about how much prep time it takes to become an expert. We all know about it takes 10,000 hours to become an expert in something. That is 40 hours a week for 5 years, right?
Mm.
That is, if you're working 50 weeks a year and take a couple of weeks of vacation, that is you working 8 hours a day, 40 hours a week for 5 years before you can call yourself an expert in something. Now, there are people who are savants and who can move a lot faster, but by and large, the connection that I was making there was that what you see as the final output if it's 2 minutes long or if it's 2 hours long, it's the result of a lot of practice. And you can't circumvent that. You can't fast forward that. You have to put in the work if you're going to be called an expert, especially in the fields that we're in consulting. We're not experts in something until we've actually been there, done that, and continue to practice it.
So, how do you advise frontline leaders? People in our world tend to think about prep, preparation as go to training, go to a class, get a degree, do a course. But I've come to learn that practice and preparation happens every day in a variety of ways. And I'm grateful for people who invest in education and invest in doing corporate training. That's how you and I, in part, make a living. But there's other ways leaders can practice and prepare for what's next on an ongoing basis. What 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 are some ideas that you would give people to prepare yourself for what's next in what I'm doing right now?
Yeah, I love that question because at the end of every training workshop that I facilitate, that I design, and that I lead, I always say, um, you've completed this course now, whether that course was 2 hours or 2 weeks long. This was just scratching the surface. This was an introduction to the topics. And while we may have practiced while we were in the workshop and while we may have role played and done some self reflection, now it's time for you to go apply these principles and apply whatever we talked about in this class, because it's only through practice, through repetition, through using some of the concepts and making them relevant for you. Some of these things are going to work. Some of these things aren't going to work for you, but you're not going to know until you apply them. And so when you finish a course, when you finish corporate training, when you finish going to a webinar, whatever it is, now the onus is on you to take those concepts and make them real. It's not intended for you to walk away from a course and say, I'm an expert in anything. Those are introductions into topics that you have to now go out and practice regularly. Go back and reflect on the notes that you took in the class and ask yourself, now that I've actually been doing these things, are these still true? These notes that I took, these things that I said I was going to be able to do, can I still do these? And if not, the gap between where I thought I was going to be and where I am actually, in reality, what can I do to close that gap? Right. And so it is the practical application over and over, the practice of that, where you can now hone your skills in whatever it is, whether it's leadership or whether it's, running a team or whatever it might be. It's not until you actually put it into practice will you determine whether what you learned in that class is true or not.
Yeah, and one of the things I would add to that is how can that person's manager be involved in that process with them? How can they coach and provide that feedback? A lot of it is self-driven and reflection and is this working for me and all the points you made, but I've also found that if you've got a manager that supports you and will take that journey with you and be a thought partner as you work to implement some of these practices, it just makes that learning even more effective.
Absolutely. I think you nailed it when you said thought partner, right? So I'm big on collaboration. I'm big on developing collaborative relationships with people and having people who are thought partners in different capacities, right? If it's a manager, then help me hold myself accountable, right?
Yeah.
We call accountability partners, and we know that we get assessments, but at the end of the day, I'm responsible for holding me accountable. But I can also ask you to help me. If you
Yeah.
see things, I am encouraging and empowering others to help point out the gaps, right? Something is a blind spot because I don't see it. If I knew that this was an area for growth, I would work on it, but it's a blind spot because I don't know that it's there. If you see that it's there, help me to close that gap.
Yeah,
Now,
it's not just the manager as I think you were alluding to. It can be a peer, it can be a friend, a spouse, it can be someone in your life that you trust and cares about you, who's willing to shine some light on those blind spots because the person with the fewest blind spots tends to win.
yes. And I will also say this is all predicated on people who want to get better. If you don't
Yeah.
care about getting better and staying in a growth mindset, then none of this matters.
So let's go on to your next point. And this is something that you're going to need to explain to me because there's a dance element here, some a definition that I'm going to need to have you help me understand. You say another connection point is core positions. Core positions. What do you mean by that?
So in ballet and in probably other dance, genres as well, uh, there are core positions. So in ballet, people learn first position, and it's a placement of your feet in a certain position, and then they learn second position and third position. And when you're watching people practice, whether they're warming up, whether they're at the bar, the instructor will say first position, second position, third position, and everyone there knows exactly how to place their feet, how to place their legs, their arms, everything. And so everything builds on top of that. You don't start off by saying, okay, everybody up on your toes, right? No, we start in first position, then we go to second position. And it's an alignment of 5 basic positions that everything else builds from. If you don't get those positions right, if you don't learn those, if you don't master those, nothing else will take place in the ballet world. You must start with those positions. And so the connection that I made between that and especially when I started my own business, when I started my business, I looked at everything that I was able to do. Like I worked for 11 years at Accenture. I worked for 3 years at Giant Leap. Now I'm starting my own business and I know how to do 1,000 different things. Let's build a website that lists 1,000 things on it and try to promote here are all the things that we can do. And that's just simply um, it's not feasible and it's just not smart. I had to reduce my services. And when I say my services, I'm speaking about my consulting practice, but this is still relevant for someone who's leading an organization or leading a team. What are those core factors? What are those handful of 3 to 5 things that we are good at, that we need to master, that we can build on top of, but it always comes back down to those core things. And so when I saw the 5 basic positions in ballet, instead of trying to, as we say, boil the entire ocean, right, and develop too many offerings, you need to narrow it down. What are the 3 to 5 things that we know we need to succeed at? And then we can build on top of that. But we can't start with, here are the 1,000 things that we're going to do. And so that's the connection that I was making between the core 5 basic positions within ballet and how you need to identify your core offerings, your core things that are going to make you successful in business. But that's also connected to my next point, which is the pivot, right? When earlier in our introduction, I was talking about the Italian fouettes. It's it's a
And I was
move.
very impressed when you used that term.
Okay.
I
It took
thought,
me a
man,
long
this
time to
guy's
learn.
good.
Appreciate that. But this concept of pivoting, 2 things. 1, it requires that you're remaining flexible, adaptable, that you're moving along with, your reaction. Hopefully, you're being proactive, but if it's a reaction to internal, external things that can impact your business, it also requires that you have at least 1 foot still anchored. So whether you're pivoting in ballet or you're pivoting in basketball, right? You're moving one leg, but you're still keeping 1 foot anchored. And it's the same thing for me in business and leadership. While we're being flexible, while we're being adaptable, while we are making necessary changes to market conditions, we still understand what our core offering is. We still understand what our core aspiration is. And so while we're being agile and while we're embracing movement to new positions and new offerings, we're still also ensuring that whatever it was that got us started, that got us here, if that's still important to us, we're not just throwing that out just for the sake of moving.
For the pursuit of some shiny object that often gets entrepreneurs in trouble oftentimes.
And you know what happens in leadership also, we call it leadership du jour. I read a book and I want to do everything that's in that book. Well, another book came out the next month, and now I throw away all the concepts from the first book, and I just start doing what's in the next book. And there are certain leaders that, depending on whatever shiny object book is in front of them that day, that's the path they take, and they never actually give it time to be sustained.
And that actually leads us to your next point, performance and consistency. What do you mean by that, in the context of dance and leadership?
Yeah, I kind of touched on this earlier. That performance, the on-stage performance, not only is that the culmination of many hours, it doesn't diminish the fact that what the audience sees, what they remember, what they spend their money on, what they fall in love with is what is on that stage, and you have to perform each and every time. You can't do a great performance on Friday night and mail it in for Saturday night, right? Same thing in business. That consistency, that high quality client service. If you're a leader, that consistent how you're showing up, right? Delivering your message, all those things. If you want people to trust you and stay engaged with you, right? You can't show up a certain way on Monday and be completely different on Tuesday, right? If you are expecting people to follow you, refer you to other businesses, if you're a consultant like me, make sure that the investment that they're making into you is fulfilling what they're paying for, right? Then you have to show up with a quality product each and every time. And that was one of the things that I actually took from my wife when she's giving notes to people about their performance. She's saying, "Hey, I know you're tired, but your Sunday matinee has to be just as good as your Friday night show and your Saturday night show." And it's the same thing in business. When I'm talking to people, I'd say, you can't be a superstar for half the week and then the other half of the week mail it in. Because what we're going to remember is how you mailed it in and not necessarily how you began the week.
I've thought about this a lot, and I do classes that I've done literally hundreds of times, but I need to bring my best A game effort to every class because, and this is what I always think about, even though I've done it hundreds of times potentially, the person in the room is seeing it for the first time, is experiencing it for the first time, and probably the only time. And they're going to, the value they take away is determined on what I give them today in this moment. I was just, I think about this a lot when I go see a concert. My wife and I went to see, we were in Vegas last weekend and we saw Garth Brooks. And Garth Brooks has been out there for 30 plus years. He's done Friends in Low Places and The River and all those big hits thousands and thousands of times and, hundreds of shows over the years. Yet he comes out on stage and gives every ounce of energy. He pours himself into every show. People are cheering and going crazy. I walked out of the auditorium saying, best show I've ever seen. But Garth has done it hundreds of times, but it was fresh for me. It was new for me. I think that point is really powerful.
And from a business perspective, those are the people that are successful when the client says, "Hey, we used you and we're going to use you again," right? I'm happy to refer you to others who can also use your services. When you walked out of that concert and someone asked you what's a great concert, you were happy to say, "Go see this concert in Vegas," right?
Yeah.
And that's what we need to strive for when we're leading our teams as well.
Yeah. Okay. We're going to pick up the pace a little bit here, even though I'm sure people would love to listen to us for 6 or 8 hours a day. We're going to pick up the pace a little bit here. Post performance notes is your next point.
Yeah.
What do you mean by that?
So two things. One, after that performance, you still have to practice again. Don't think that just because you did a great performance once that it's over. And so we see that connection between ballet and business as well. Just because you nailed it doesn't mean that you still don't practice. Even in, when we think about the world of sports, the greatest golfer still has a coach. The greatest quarterback still has a coach. There's something that we can continue to improve on. And then that takes us into that last point, that post performance. When you get off stage, no matter how well you did, they have notes for you, and they're literally called notes. Here's something that we need to improve on for our next performance. Here's something that we didn't quite nail. It was a 99 out of 100, but here's the 1 point on that one thing that we didn't get right. In our business, how are we auditing our own performance, right? What are we doing on a daily basis, weekly basis, monthly basis? Post-training assessments, just internal assessments. I can get feedback from people that I interact with all day, but am I being realistic myself about my own performance And am I taking those notes? And then am I incorporating those notes into changes? Whether it's, I keep using training as an example, whether I'm delivering a training or whether it's just how I'm running my team. If I feel like everybody isn't fully engaged or everybody isn't fully supported, where can I look internally first about the changes that I need to make before I ask them to be any better? How can I better support them? And so that's what I meant by the post-performance notes.
Yeah, and I think the best leaders are open to receiving those notes. Even as you mentioned, top athletes, what performers, actors, the best ones are always striving to get better, and getting better is a result of receiving feedback well and graciously and implementing that feedback. Okay,
When you're when you're
final.
when you're giving feedback, always ask, "What can I do better to support you?" When you're giving someone else feedback, ask them to help you help them as well.
Yeah, I love that. Final thought on keep practicing, keep growing. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, so it's never you're never done, right? It's not a case where I did it, I'm an expert, everybody loves me, and now I'm done. Well, there's always something that you can learn. If you don't learn something every day, you're either the smartest person I've ever met or the dumbest person I've ever met, one or the other. But I continue to look at even something like this blog. I'm sure that if and when my wife reads it, her being the ballet expert, she's going to have some notes for me. She's going to say, "This is something that made sense, but you didn't quite nail it on this." And I have to be open to that, and I encourage everyone else to be open as well. I love having dialogue with people where we can just openly talk about how am I showing up? What's different about how I thought I was doing versus how you received what I was putting out, right? And so that need to keep practicing, that need to keep honing your skills is what I think makes everyone, better as a leader or better as a team member.
And we all need people in our lives that we feel we can trust. You mentioned your wife will have some notes for you. My wife has notes for me on a daily basis. But I accept those notes because I know the intent behind them. She wants me to be better. She has my best interest at heart. She's not gonna hurt me. And if you're in relationship with people, good people who you can trust in that way, receiving that feedback is just much easier.
Yeah.
So, Ali, we end every episode with my famous question, and here it is for you. Give our listeners one piece of advice, simple, practical advice that they can put to work right away that will make them a better leader. What advice would that be from you to them?
Stop asking what keeps you up at night. Instead, replace that with what am I excited to get up in the morning and do? And so
Oh,
instead of you still might be in bed tossing and turning, but instead of me tossing and turning over this negative, what am I doing wrong? I'm tossing and turning about the opportunities for tomorrow. What is it about tomorrow that I just can't wait to get up and go do?
I love it. I love it. Friends, we've had a conversation with Ahli Moore. He's an outstanding consultant, facilitator of learning. Please connect with him on any of the social platforms that are in the show notes. He is out there, he's available. He'd love to continue the conversation with you. Ali, thanks for being on the Mission First People Always podcast. I love what you're doing. I love what you talk about, and I wish you great success.
Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure. And I look forward to round two sometime in the future.
All right, let's do it. Friends, thanks for being part of this episode of the Mission First People Always podcast. We talk about becoming better leaders, building great teams, and doing it with a people-centric, relational focus. And I'm really happy to do that and be part of your lives. Thanks for being part of mine. Until next time, God bless, and we'll see you on the next episode. Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening. We hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you want to create a stronger, more people-centric and empowered culture for your organization, visit drmikepatterson.com.